Welcome to Exploring Computing. Today's video is Introduction to CSS. So last lecture we learned how to use HTML. And you may be wondering, am I ready to make cool web pages? And the answer is, well, not really. It turns out that you actually need to know two different languages to make web pages. You need to know HTML, and you can make web pages with just HTML, but if you want cool, interesting, fun-looking web pages, you need to learn a second language, CSS or cascading style sheets. What we've done here is we've separated out our semantic information from our presentation information. So HTML is now used just to provide semantic information, and cascading style sheets tells us how to present that information. So what's the difference here? Well, the paragraph tag tells us that we have a paragraph. That's semantic information. If we want to style that paragraph, like we say, oh, I want that to have a 1-inch indentation, or I want to surround the paragraph with a 2-pixel solid red border, that's presentation information. Similarly, if we have a list of items, the semantic information is it's a list of items. The presentation information could be, well, I don't really want to use bullets there. I want to use little Stanford tree logos in front of each of the items in the list. Or I want each of the items to be separated by a 2-pixel red line. So that's the presentation information. So basically, the HTML is only going to provide information telling the web browser, this is the type of element this is, but not this is how to present this particular element. That's the job of the cascading style sheets. Why are we doing this? Why are we separating these? Well, originally we only had HTML and it did everything. But by separating the two out, we actually have a lot more flexibility for changes. So, for example, suppose we were to create a news article back in 2005. And someone were to search for that news article on our website, and our website has gone through several design changes since then. And the question is, should that article look like the 2005 website, or should we somehow upgrade that web page to match the new 2020 web design? And so by separating out the semantic information, which is the same regardless of whether the article was written in 2005 or 2020, you know, if that's an H1, that's the major size heading. If that's a paragraph, that's a paragraph. Whereas the information on, hey, we've decided that our H1 should be centered and in red now, whereas 15 years ago, we thought it should appear, you know, on the left side in black. That's presentation information. I think even more importantly today, we need to remember that there's different presentations for our website depending upon the device it's appearing in. So we still have the same semantic information. That's a paragraph, that's a list, that's a table, but exactly how it's going to appear will depend on whether or not the user is visiting our website on a desktop machine, on a tablet, or a smartphone. We'll see more of this as the quarter goes on. Basically, the cascading style sheet provides all the formatting information from the web page. And rather unfortunately, that was Maddie. She seems to be super excited about something. She's very excited. Unfortunately, cascading style sheets have their own language with their own syntax rules and its own semantics. And frankly, it does not look like the HTML team and the CSS teams were talking at all. Okay, so we're going to go over a example here. This is the example I usually go through in my classes. And unfortunately, it's going to be a bit awkward doing it in this format, but I think it's a pretty good example. It basically will allow me to show you all the different things I think you need to know about cascading style sheets, at least as far as the basics go. So this is a big game example about the big game between Stanford and Cal. And what we're seeing here is this is the top of the file. You can see, we've got our H1s, we've got our H2s, we've got a bunch of paragraphs. And then if we were to continue scrolling down, down at the bottom, and this is important because I do use this for part of the example, you can see down at the bottom, there's an ordered list with a bunch of list items showing the scores from earlier big games. And then there's an unordered list with a bunch of list items talking about other things other than just a football game. The difference between the ordered list and the unordered list is the ordered list lists different items and puts numbers in front of them. So it'll be like item 1, item 2, item 3. Although with cascading style sheets, you could actually change item 1, item 2, item 3 to Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, or letter A, letter B, letter C. And you can also do upper or lowercase. So uppercase A, uppercase B, uppercase C, and so on. And then the unordered list generally presents the items with bullets in front of them. But again, with cascading style sheets, you could say, well, I don't want bullets in front of them. I want squares in front of them. Or, as I suggested a little earlier, if you really wanted to, you could put little Stanford logos in front of each of the items. All right, well, let's move on here. Okay, so here's what the website looks like actually displayed on the web browser. Here's the top of the web page, and here's the bottom of the web page. And you can see down at the bottom of the web page, there's our ordered list and our unordered list. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start off by showing you how to put style rules directly into the HTML file. We'll see later at the end of this lecture that you can actually stick the style rules in an external file, and we'll talk about why you might want to do that later on. But for now, we're just going to put the styles directly into this HTML file. And so what I've done is up in the head, and this goes in the head because this is not stuff that appears directly on the web page. This is stuff about the web page. So this is go up in the head. We're going to add a style start tag and a style end tag. And then we're going to stick in a bunch of style rules. This is what a style rule looks like. And this particular style rule says, I want all the H1s on my web page, and in this case, there's only one H1, to appear in red. Okay, so there's a couple different parts of the style rule. There's what's called a selector, and the selector says, these are the different elements on the web page that this particular rule should apply to. So we're going to see lots of different ways to select items on the web page. So, you know, we're going to say, oh, I want to select these particular items on the web page and apply this style rule to it. We'll see that throughout the rest of this lecture. And then the other part is what's called a declaration block. And that says, this is the presentation information for elements which match this particular selector. In this case, I want this color to appear in red. And you can have a bunch of items in the declaration block. So here I say, oh, I want the color to be red. I want the text decoration to be underlined, and I want it to be aligned center. And notice that you separate out each of these items with semicolons. Okay, the individual declarations consist of a style property, and there are a whole bunch of style properties. I provided you with Appendix B from the CS105 course reader. That has a list of quite a few of them, but there are a fair amount more. So it says the style properties is the color, and then the style value is red. So this says appear in with the color red. Okay, we're going to spend most of this lecture talking about the different ways we can select items on the web page. I will briefly go over the different style properties that are available for us to modify. I'll kind of give you an overview of what the different style properties available to modify are. And we'll be seeing different style properties over the next couple weeks. Well, the next couple weeks for CS105. For CS106E, we're only covering this for a week. So, okay, so this first selector that we saw, this is what's referred to as a type selector. It says this is the particular type of element that I want this to apply to. So I want this to apply to just the H1s. We can actually list a bunch of these. So this is also a type selector. This says I want this to apply to the H1s, the H2s, and the H3s. And you can see the H1 and H2 and H3 that fit on the screen at least are all appear in red. Now, let's go back to that end section I mentioned. We were going to use it for part of our example. So we have that ordered list and we have that unordered list. And both the ordered list and the unordered list use list items. So if I want to color one of the list items, I can go ahead and do that. Here I've said all the list items should appear in red, and they all appear in red. What if I want only some of those list items to appear in red? What if I only want the items in the ordered list to appear in red and not the ones in the unordered list? Well, I can use a descendant selector for that. And so what I say is this will apply to all list items that are inside of an ordered list. Notice that the descendant selector, we just separate the element types with spaces, whereas the type selector, remember the H1, the H2, and the H3, I said I wanted to apply to all three of those. I separate those by commas. So use commas when you say, oh, here's a bunch of items. I want this to apply to any of the elements that match this criteria. And then use the spaces when you're trying to say this element is contained within this other element with our descendant selectors. There are some fancier selectors, which I'm not going to go over, that say the descendant selector says this will apply to this element if it is nested at any level. So if I have an ordered list that has an unordered list in it, that has an unordered list in it, that has an ordered list in it, this will apply to any of those because all of those list items are ultimately inside of the ordered list. There's another one where you can say it must be a direct descendant, but we're not going to go over that. You can look that up if you want. Let's go back to the middle of our example. So I've got these H3s here. So the bonfire, impaling OSCE, Gades, and the axe. These are all different things related to big game. Suppose I wanted to apply a rule to one of these H3s, but not the other two. Can I do that? Yes, you actually can. What we could do is we can add a class attribute value pair to one of the H3s. So here I've added let's say somebody in the class is in Gades and they think the Gades is more important than the other two. So we're going to add H3 class equals important in the HTML tag for the H3. And then we're going to create a style rule that specifically says it only applies to things that are important. So this is called a class selector. And in the HTML, I just say class equals, quote, important, end quote. And then the style selector itself, I put a dot in front of it. So the dot goes in the style rule. It does not appear in the HTML tag with the class. And so you can see that this has turned the Gades H3, heading 3, to green, and it has italicized it. Now, with the class, I can actually apply this to multiple items. So let's say, impaling OSCE, that's done by the Leland Stanford Junior University Marching Band. And so let's say somebody in the class is in the band, and they're like, hey, Gades is great, but the band is important too. So I can go ahead and mark both of these as class equals important. And our rule will apply to both of those. And in fact, I'm not limited to just H3s. So, maybe the Gades person's like, okay, fine. We put impaling OSCE into class equals important. Well, I'm not only going to have my heading important, I'm going to have my entire paragraph important. And so we can go ahead and do that. That rule applies to, all three of these elements, even though one of them's a paragraph and the other two are H3s. Now you can actually combine different selectors. So what I've done here is I've said, okay, that's great. All the important elements will appear with color red and they will appear font style italic. But the paragraph that is important will also have an underline. Other paragraphs that aren't marked as important, they're not going to have an underline, but any paragraph that has class equals important, I want that to be underlined. And sure enough, that's what it does. Now, there's another selector we can use that's very similar to the class selector, but it's a little bit different and it serves a slightly different purpose. And this is the ID selector. So let's say somebody's on the axe committee and they're like, hey, what about me? And they think, I'm going to one up those guys. They've got class equals important. Well, anybody can put on class equals important. I'm going to mark mine with an ID equals superior. And so this is how the ID selector works. It uses the number sign instead of the dot. And the key thing about the ID is only one element on the web page may have a given ID. So, other elements on the web page, we can mark as many elements on the web page as we want with class equals important. There can only be one single element on the web page with ID equals superior. And that's really its purpose. So there's a couple of times when you're trying to create an element on the web page and you only want one possible element to be there. And it's also useful as a documentation device. If somebody creates a web page design and somebody else is trying to maintain that web page, when they see that it's using an ID selector, that sort of tells them, hey, I really only want one of these elements with this ID. Whereas if it's a class, they can go ahead and modify the design a bit and add classes to a bunch of items. Now, one of the things about this big game web page is it's got the word Stanford in a bunch of places on the web page. No surprise there. What if I wanted to do some styling information on just the word Stanford? Could I do that? Well, if the word Stanford were in italics, for example, and I wanted to turn Stanford red, I could go ahead and do that. I could just say, hey, Stanford's in italics, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new class. We say class equals Stanford, and then I can write a rule for things that have class equals Stanford, and I just say dot Stanford. But that only works if the word Stanford is inside of some sort of a set of tags, like the italics tag or the bold tag. What if I don't have Stanford inside a set of tags? Can I still write a class for it? And actually, the answer is yes. You need to add a tag, but there's a special tag whose only purpose in life is to allow you to put classes or IDs on it. And this is the span tag. So here I've added a span tag around the word Stanford. If I didn't put a class on this or an ID on it, this would serve no purpose at all. It by itself, the span tag does absolutely nothing. But because the word Stanford now has a tag around it, I can go ahead and give it an ID. I can give it a class. I can put some other items on it as well. Okay, so there's actually a pair of these. There's a span tag, and then there's a div tag. I don't have an example for the div tag here, but what's the difference between the span tag and the div tag? Well, remember in the last video of the last lecture, I talked about how there's this difference between text level, also known as inline tags, which are supposed to put styling on just a word or a couple words, or maybe even a couple letters within a word. And then there are block level tags, which create blocks of information. So inline or text level tags would be like the bold tag or the italics tag. Block level tags would be like the paragraph tag or the H1, H2, H3, and other heading tags, or like there's a table tag. Those are all creating blocks of information. And we talked about how you can't put an inline tag around a block tag, but you can put a block around an inline tag. Well, it turns out span is an inline tag. So if you want to completely surround a bunch of blocks, you couldn't put a span around a bunch of blocks because that's illegal. That would be putting an inline tag around a bunch of block tags. Div, on the other hand, is a block level tag, and it can contain flow. So that means you could put a div around a whole bunch of items, and if those items are block tags, that's totally legal. Other than that, div tag largely works the same as a span tag. Its main purpose in life is to just allow you to stylize things. Div tag can also be used as sort of a replacement for paragraph, so arguably it's a little bit more useful than span. Default div tag by itself will create a little block, but in contrast to the paragraph, which, as we've seen, puts a blank line between it and other elements, the div tag does not put any blank lines. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've been mostly going over here's how to select different items on the web page and give them style rules. What I want to talk about now is what sort of properties are out there. And I'm going to go through this really quick. I'm not going to go into detail, and there are plenty more where these came from, but I just want to kind of give you a sense on well, what sorts of things can we do? And again, check the Appendix B handout that has a list of a whole bunch of them. Okay, so I can change font properties. So these include things like what the font family is. That would be like, am I using Times New Roman? Am I using Helvetica? What font am I using? I can change the font style. This will allow me to do italics. I can change the font weight. This is, man, he's going at it again. There was a skunk out earlier, and she was going absolutely berserko when we could smell the skunk from inside. That may still be what's going on there. Anyway, font weight. This is how you change things to bold. It turns out that font weight is actually a bit fancier. It allows us to go from 100 up to 900. So like 700 is bold. I think 400 is regular. 300 is light. And so like 900 is super bold. Most fonts don't actually support this, and not necessarily every web browser will support it, but that option is there. And just as a side note, I was playing around with Photoshop trying to get one of the title, those little art, I don't know what to call it art, those little drawings I have the title of each of these videos, and I did run into a font that had all sorts of different options, including semi-bold and bold and light and regular. So there are some fonts out there that definitely support this. And then there's font size. Okay, and then there's text properties. So if you've ever been working on a paper for a class, CS106E students, I know some of you may be using 4 unit, maybe take a CS106E for 4 units and might need to write some papers. Don't listen to this part of the lecture. I don't want you doing this. Okay, so for the rest of you guys, if you've ever been in a class and they're like, hey, we need to get you, we need to have you print, you need to write a 4-page essay. You start off and you're not quite there and you're like, oh, I'm going to increase the line size. Well, you can do that with the text properties. You can increase the spacing between the lines, but you can actually go a bit further. You can increase the spacing between the words just slightly. And if that's still not doing it, you can actually increase the spacing between the letters and get yourself a little bit more space. It's also got text decorations, which allows to underline, and actually you can put a line through something or you can put a line above something. It controls vertical alignment and text align, which is horizontal alignment. I should mention one of the interesting things about cascading style sheets that we didn't used to have with HTML is cascading style sheets actually allows us all sorts of different measurement types. So when you're putting in a measurement, often you can put a percentage in, not always, but you can also put in measurements in pixels, millimeters, inches, picos. There's just a whole bunch of different measurement types you can use. So that's kind of cool. Okay, color and background properties. So you can set the color, that's the foreground color. You can set the background color. We'll talk in the lecture about how to actually create these colors. You can put a background image behind any element. So you can put a background image behind the entire web page body. You could put a background image behind specific elements. There's a bunch of other properties I'm not listing here that kind of control how those background images work. Okay, another set of properties are the box properties. These are used to create borders around elements. So you can create the border itself. You can also control the spacing between the element and the border and control the spacing between the border and the surrounding elements. We're going to go over this in more detail when I show you how to create images and put images on your web page. You can also move elements to the left or the right of the web page and have text flow alongside on the opposite side of the web page. This is called float, and again, we'll see this in detail when we go over images. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of the sort of properties that are out there. There are a couple more specialized properties. For example, there's properties that allow you to place elements at specific points on the web page. These are called positioning properties. 105 students will take a look at those. 106E students, I am going to put the extra 105 lectures up on the 106E Canvas site. So, if you're interested, you can watch those as well, but they won't be part of the standard CS106E lectures. Okay, so as I said when we started this all, we put the style tag directly into the HTML file. Now there's, I did that because I think it's easiest to understand what's going on, but it's not always the best approach. Let's say I've got another web page. So I've been styling our big game web page, and I've got a different web page on graduation at Stanford, which has its own set of traditions. And here you can see I've got my big game web page that I've stylized now, and then I've got my graduation web page. And the graduation web page looks kind of boring now because it has no styling information whatsoever. So suppose I wanted to take the style rules from the big game web page and stick them in the graduation web page. Could I do that? Well, the simplest thing to do, based on what you know right now, is you just go in, you grab that style tag and all the style rules between the style start tag and style end tags, you copy it and you paste it in the graduation HTML file. And that totally will work, but now they're out of sync. So if you were to make changes to one of the style sheets, it would not be updated on the other style sheet. So that's actually not the best approach. What you really want is you want a single style sheet that applies to all the HTML files on your website. So we can do this with an external style sheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all the style rules in the style tag. We're going to toss out the style tag itself. So I've seen a lot of students copy it over and they copy the style tag as well as all the style rules. Don't do that. Only copy the style rules. And we're going to put into another file, which we're going to give the name example.css. So this is a CSS file. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the style tags from the original HTML. I'm going to replace them with a link tag. Here's what the link tag looks like. Link relationship equals style sheet, and then href, and then a reference to the style sheet that I'm using. This relationship here is kind of interesting because this link tag, they've had lots of theories about what this link tag could be used for other than style sheets, but as far as I know, it's still pretty much just used for style sheets. What else could it be used for? Well, so here's an example. So if you've got a Windows PC, you may be familiar with the idea that if you hit the F1 key, that actually brings up help about the application. Now, if you're running a web browser and you hit the F1 key, that doesn't bring up information about the current website. So let's say I can't figure out what this website's all about. I hit the F1 key. What do I get? I get help for Chrome or Firefox. I don't get help for the website. And so the idea here would be you say link relationship equals help, and then you could list an HTML file. That would tell the web browser if somebody asks for help about this web page, here's what you should tell them. You should take them to this particular web page. Another one that was proposed, and these have been in the standard, although they've kind of shuffled them in and out of the standard, is, they're like, this is a great idea, and then none of the web browsers end up supporting it. I really like this idea. There was the idea of having a relationship equal glossary. So if you're on a website that has relationship equals glossary and the web browser understands what relationship equals glossary means, and there's some word on that website you don't understand, you select that word, you hit some key that the web browser understands, and it's like, oh, I know, here's the glossary file for that. Let me look it up in the glossary file for this website, and I can tell you what that word actually means. They've also had forward and backward relationships, and that would be if you're trying to page through the website, but for some reason you don't want to click on links, you just want to hit some key on your web browser, or maybe you're on your mobile phone and you just want to thumb through it. So anyway, they have lots of different ideas on what relationships could mean, but as far as I know, the style sheet is the only one that's really in widespread usage. Anyway, so that's why you need to put in the relationship there. So they're using the link tag. just a general purpose tag. And you need to specifically say, this is the particular use of the link tag I'm using. These two files are related to each other, and the relationship between them is this other file, example.css, that is the style sheet for the HTML file that the link tag is appearing in. Okay, so I can use the same link tag in both biggame.html and graduation.html, and then bang, that copies the styles over to both of them. And then if I make further changes to example.css, it will affect the styles in both of these web pages. So in general, you want an external style sheet because it's going to allow you to make changes in a single location, have them ripple across all your web pages on your website. Okay, last thing I wanted to cover today, or at least for this video, the Cascade. So, this is called cascading style sheets. And so you could probably get some sense on why it's called style sheets. Why is it called cascading style sheets? What is this word cascade? So here's the idea on Cascade. You can have multiple rules which conflict with each other. So here I'm saying all H3s should appear in blue, and things that are important should appear in yellow, and H3s that are important should appear in red. And so the question is, if you've got an H3 that's important, does it appear in blue, yellow, or red? And the answer is red. So basically, the simple handy rule is the more specific elements are going to win. So dot important is more specific than an H3. An H3 and dot important is more specific than just dot important. So the most specific rule wins. It actually turns out each of these different selector types has a point value, and the system adds up the point values. So I actually don't know what the point values are. I have to look them up. So H3 has a particular point value. Class dot important is going to have a higher point value, and then H3 dot important, you're going to add the two together so you get an even higher point value. But then something like an ID selector, that has a higher point value than a class selector. I think probably the H3 dot important is still going to beat out an ID selector, but that's basically the way the Cascade works. So that is the Cascade. So we're going to continue to see CSS usage throughout the rest of our discussion on web pages. So, if you want to know what else can I do with this, we'll be taking a look at some examples. And if you want to know a better sense of like, how does this work? How does this fit in? When do I use an external versus internal style sheet? We're going to be going over a lot more examples. All right, so that's it for this video.